Have you ever done everything right and still watched her walk away like none of it mattered? You didn't lie. You didn't cheat. You stayed when things got hard. You gave her loyalty, depth, presence, and still she left. Not with a scream, but with a quiet drift. This isn't just heartbreak, it's confusion. And it's the kind of confusion that turns men bitter if they can't explain it. That's the space Arthur Schopenhauer entered, not just as a philosopher, but as a man. He didn't just study women, he tried to reach one. And when that failed, he built a philosophy to survive the wound. But if you're not careful, you'll inherit that worldview and mistake grief for clarity. You'll understand why by the end. It doesn't happen like the movies. There's no betrayal, no screaming match, no final text that makes it all make sense. Just silence, a change in tone, a slower response. And suddenly, you're no longer chosen. But you didn't disappear. You stayed. You were honest. You were kind. You listened. You remembered the little things. You didn't run when it got hard. You didn't hide when she opened up. You weren't perfect, but you were real. And that's supposed to matter. That's supposed to be enough. So when she leaves, or worse, stays, but starts to vanish emotionally, it doesn't just hurt. It unravels something deeper. It breaks your internal logic, because this wasn't supposed to happen to you. You weren't the careless one. You weren't the liar, the game player, the narcissist. You were the good one. And that's where the confusion begins. Most men don't fall apart from heartbreak. They fall apart from contradiction, because the things they were taught about what women want, about what love rewards, stop lining up with what they experience. You gave your best. You stood by her. And still, she drifted. And now, you're left trying to explain the inexplicable, not just to others, but to yourself. And that's where the fracture happens. You start replaying everything, every conversation, every choice. You wonder if there was something you missed, something small that, if said differently, could have changed the outcome. But deep down, you know it wasn't a sentence. It wasn't a mistake. It was something else, something more primal. Something you don't know how to name. Arthur Schopenhauer didn't just face this moment, he drowned in it. He wasn't some detached cynic writing about women from a cold, clinical distance. He was a man who tried, who pursued love, who showed up with intellect, with truth, with presence. And still, she didn't choose him, and that broke him. But instead of sitting in that pain, grieving it, processing it, he did what many men do when the world no longer makes sense. He turned the wound into a worldview. He built a fortress of logic around his rejection. He intellectualized it, philosophized it, transformed heartbreak into doctrine. And on the surface, it worked. He produced insights, he sounded enlightened. But underneath it all was the same ache. Unspoken, unprocessed, unresolved. That's the real danger. Not just that men get hurt, but that they get confused by the hurt. That they try to solve it like a puzzle instead of feel it like a wound. And in doing so, they become someone else entirely. Not colder, just more distant. Not cruel, but unreachable. This isn't about women, not yet. It's about what happens inside a man when everything he believed about love collapses. That collapse has a name, and Schopenhauer would spend the rest of his life trying to outrun it. But you don't have to. Stay with this, because in the next section, you'll see why your pain didn't fail. It just didn't speak the language biology listens to. She didn't leave because you were bad. She left because something in her couldn't feel you anymore. And that's what most men don't understand until it's too late. Attraction isn't a reward system. It doesn't hand out points for emotional labor. It doesn't grade on kindness or effort. It moves in silence, without fairness or reason. And when it shifts, it feels like betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's instinct. Arthur Schopenhauer was one of the first to articulate this brutality, not as praise, but as accusation. He saw human beings not as spiritual creatures chasing meaning, but as animals driven by something deeper. something blind. He called it the will, a primal force that lives in all things, pressing forward endlessly for one goal: continuation, more life, more survival, reproduction, not redemption. And that force doesn't care how good you are. It doesn't care about your loyalty, your poetry, your presence. It only scans for viability, strength, direction, gravitas, the kind of presence that makes the world bend, not beg. To Schopenhauer, love was a mask that instinct wears to keep the game going. Desire wasn't a sacred longing, it was bait, a way to trap men in pursuit of something that didn't truly exist. But here's what he missed. He wasn't just describing the world, he was reacting to it. His ideas weren't birthed from clarity, they were carved out of rejection. He believed women didn't choose men like him because they were irrational. But the truth is harsher. They didn't choose men like him because the will doesn't seek insight. It seeks security. Not financial security, not surface-level confidence, but energetic security, that wordless signal that says, I don't need you to center me, I've already done it myself. And when a woman's biology scans for that and doesn't find it, she drifts, not out of malice, but out of preservation. This is what makes the good man so confused. He thought his goodness was the point. He thought being kind, steady, emotionally available would build love. And in a different world, it might. But in this one, where instinct pulls the strings behind the scenes, virtue without structure is invisible. That doesn't mean kindness is worthless. It means it must rest on something deeper, something unshakable, direction, containment, a rooted presence that doesn't explain itself to feel secure. And that presence isn't built from performance. It's forged through individuation, through detaching your self-worth from her reaction to you. This is what Schopenhauer failed to do. He didn't build himself back stronger. He built arguments to defend the parts of him that felt discarded. He called women manipulative, but what he was really mourning was biology's indifference to his value. You might feel that too, but don't turn it into hatred. Turn it into clarity. Because in the next section, you'll see why being emotionally available without anchoring doesn't attract trust. It triggers fear. And that's the mistake almost every good man makes. You opened up. You told the truth. You shared your doubts, your fears, your story. You thought that would bring you closer. Instead, it made her retreat, and you're left wondering, what did I do wrong? The answer is uncomfortable, because technically, you did nothing wrong, but something deeper was missing. Not in your words, in your presence. You were emotionally available, but you weren't anchored. And that distinction makes all the difference. This is where most good men get blindsided. They equate openness with connection, believing that honesty is enough to build trust. But for the feminine instinct, emotional expression without internal structure doesn't read as intimacy. It reads as instability, because whether she knows it or not, her biology isn't just looking for vulnerability, it's testing for containment. Schopenhauer never named it this way, but he lived it. He wasn't emotionally closed. He was expressive, brilliant, intellectually transparent, but something in him didn't hold. His insights weren't integrated, they floated, and when he poured them out, they weren't received with reverence, they were met with distance. Because without rootedness, even truth can feel weightless. Emotional availability, when untethered, creates an energetic vacuum. You reach for her with words, but beneath them, your energy is seeking reassurance. And she feels that, not consciously but biologically, and her instinct recoils. Not because she's cold, not because she's cruel, because something in her can't locate the structure to relax into. And when that happens, the drift begins. At first, she just seems quieter, then a little impatient, then increasingly distracted. You start to feel like you're over-explaining, over-giving, overreaching, and she's no longer responding in kind, not because she doesn't hear you, but because your emotional presence isn't being felt as safety. It's being read as need. This is why so many good men break down. They give what they were told women want: vulnerability, honesty, affection, and they're punished for it. Or at least that's how it feels. But the truth is, the delivery matters more than the content. It's not what you feel, it's what you carry. Masculine presence isn't just stillness, it's containment. It's the ability to feel something fully without spilling it everywhere. It's the capacity to grieve without collapsing, to speak without seeking, to open, not because you want to be chosen, but because you've already chosen yourself. Schopenhauer didn't know how to do that. He opened from pain, from rejection, from longing, and when his truth wasn't enough to win love, he turned against the very force that denied him. You might feel tempted to do the same, but don't confuse emotional exposure with emotional mastery, because in the next section, we'll explore the moment you felt it, that click when her gaze changed. Not because of what you said, but because she could no longer feel your weight. And that moment, more than anything, defines what happens next. There's no announcement, no explanation, no warning shot. Just a moment, barely noticeable at first, when something in her gaze changes. She still smiles, still says the right things, still answers your texts, but you feel it. You're no longer being seen, you're being managed. She listens, but not with curiosity. She touches you, but without presence. She's there, but not in it. Something behind her eyes has withdrawn, and the part of you that once felt chosen now feels tolerated. Most men don't talk about this moment because there's no script for it, no name for the pain it causes. But this is the moment that fractures the masculine psyche. Because you didn't break the connection. You showed up. You were solid. You were kind. You were available. You thought that meant security. But something in her drifted. And that's the hardest part to explain. How it's possible to do everything right and still lose her interest. Still lose her loyalty. Still lose her gaze. Schopenhauer didn't just theorize this. He lived it. He wasn't discarded because he was weak or cruel. He was dismissed because the very things he offered, his intellect, his insight, his depth, failed to land in the language her instincts could feel, and that dissonance crushed him. He thought love was a transaction of value. Bring enough mind, enough meaning, enough presence, and you'll be received. But biology plays a different game. Her instincts aren't reading your effort. They're scanning for gravity, for the kind of presence that doesn't orbit hers, the kind of energy that holds its own trajectory, whether she looks at it or not. This is the moment where the signal gets lost. You may still be saying the same things, but now they land differently. She doesn't lean in. She leans away. She's no longer responding to your depth because she doesn't feel your depth, not as rooted, not as direction, but as reach. And the more you try to repair it, by talking, by offering more of yourself, by doubling down on loyalty, the worse it gets. Because now the underlying frame has shifted. You're no longer the man she was drawn to. You're the man who's trying to win her back. That shift is almost invisible, but it's everything. Schopenhauer didn't recover from it. He decided the feminine psyche was defective, that women were incapable of honoring masculine depth. But the truth is harsher and more human. She didn't stop loving you because you weren't good. She stopped loving you because something in you stopped leading. You began orbiting her, and her instincts, ancient and silent, began looking elsewhere for direction, for containment, for gravity. And that's what most good men never learn. They think loyalty secures love, but in the moment you start chasing her emotional presence, you lose your own, and she can feel it. The tragedy isn't that she left, it's that you left yourself first and didn't notice. In the next section, we'll explore what happens when men don't grieve that moment, but intellectualize it, when pain becomes ideology, and how Schopenhauer built a worldview not out of wisdom, but out of loss. When the silence sets in, and her absence starts to feel louder than her presence ever did, a man doesn't just hurt, he begins to rewrite reality. Not all at once. At first, it's subtle. A quiet story forms in the background. Maybe women aren't what I thought they were. Maybe love is manipulation. Maybe it's all instinct and everything I gave meant nothing. That voice feels like clarity, but it isn't. It's grief, untouched, unspoken, unprocessed, disguised as logic. This is the path Arthur Schopenhauer took. He wasn't just a philosopher. He was a wounded man trying to explain why his deepest efforts to connect fell flat. And when he couldn't find an answer that made peace, he built a belief system that made distance. He called it truth, but it was architecture, a fortress. Inside it, he was safe. Safe from needing, safe from hoping, safe from ever being made small again in the presence of a woman who couldn't feel what he offered. And that's the danger, not heartbreak, but the interpretation of heartbreak. Because when a good man is hurt enough times without understanding why, he stops trying to feel and starts trying to decode. His pain becomes a riddle, his disappointment becomes a thesis, and eventually, his isolation becomes a worldview. You've seen it happen. The man who was once warm now speaks with bitterness. The one who used to lead with openness now preaches control. He talks about female nature like it's a trap, about love like it's always manipulation, about vulnerability like it's suicide. But underneath that rhetoric is something far more familiar. He tried, he reached, he gave, and it didn't matter. So now he builds walls, not to keep women out, but to keep his heart from trying again. This is how pain turns into ideology, and the world often rewards it. Other wounded men nod in agreement. Algorithms echo the message. The story starts to sound objective, but it's not objective, it's protective. And it's dangerous because it feels so rational. That's what made Schopenhauer compelling. His pain had vocabulary. He wrapped heartbreak in philosophy. He turned rejection into metaphysics. And many men still carry his legacy, not as an insight, but as a shield. But here's what most miss. Ideology isn't clarity, it's compression. It takes a wound too complex to feel and turns it into a binary. They're like this, I'm like that, end of story. But that's not healing, that's hiding. Because healing doesn't sound like a theory. It sounds like silence, like surrender, like letting yourself admit it hurt. And I don't understand why. That's what Schopenhauer never did, and it's what many men still avoid. But there's another way. In the next section, you will see the shift, not from pain into theory, but from pain into evolution. A path where you stop asking why she didn't stay and start asking why it broke you to begin with. That's not bitterness, that's the beginning of individuation. At some point, you stop asking why she left. Not because the question is answered, but because you realize it was never the right question. The real question isn't about her, it's about you. Why did her absence unravel you? Why did her distance feel like a collapse of identity? This is where most men stand at a fork in the road. One path is easier. It leads into ideology, into walls, into clarity that isn't really clarity, just containment. You tell yourself women are broken, love is a lie, vulnerability is suicide. You walk harder, speak colder, live smaller, and the world rewards you for it. Other men clap. YouTube recommends more videos. The algorithm doesn't ask if you're healing, it just asks if you're watching. But the other path, that's where individuation begins. Not healing, not recovery, not getting back out there. Individuation, the slow, brutal process of pulling your sense of self out of every place you left it. In her eyes, in her approval, in her choosing of you. It's where you stop building strategies to attract and start building a self that no longer needs to be seen to feel real. And that begins with honesty. Not performative honesty, the kind that still hopes she's watching, but the kind that hurts to say out loud, I built myself around being chosen. I thought love would rescue me from my own uncertainty. I offered my depth not as a gift, but as a plea. Schopenhauer never took that path. He intellectualized the feminine, reduced her to instinct, and condemned the whole gender because one woman couldn't feel him. But the man who individuates doesn't react. He reclaims. He reclaims the part of him that waited for someone else's gaze to reflect his worth. He stops chasing value as a currency in someone else's marketplace and starts aligning with a life that makes sense to him, even if no one claps. Because the truth is, most men don't want to lead. They want to be recognized. They want to be affirmed. They want to be reflected in the soft eyes of someone who says, yes, I see you. And there's nothing weak about that. But when that's your only mirror, you're vulnerable to every drift, every rejection, every silence. Individuation is what remains when the mirror is gone. It's when you learn to feel whole without being held. When your emotional availability is no longer performance. When your loyalty is no longer strategy. When your presence is no longer bait. That's when gravity begins. Not outward force, but inward integration. You don't need to prove your masculinity, you feel it, because it's no longer borrowed from her reaction. And when that happens, something strange occurs. You stop fearing loss, you stop bending for validation. And without trying, you begin to radiate the one thing that drew her in the first place, anchored presence. In the final section, we'll return to Schopenhauer one last time to name what he missed. Because pain, when ignored, becomes ideology, but when integrated, it becomes strength no one can take. Schopenhauer wasn't entirely wrong. Desire is dangerous. Love does create suffering. Biology doesn't reward the virtues we were told it would. He saw it all, but he stopped there. He mistook the pain of being unseen for a revelation about the world. He turned heartbreak into a diagnosis. He turned rejection into a thesis. He turned women into symbols of everything that didn't love him back. And when you do that, when you freeze pain into certainty, you never have to feel it again. But you also never evolve. That's what he missed. Because behind his genius was a man who never stopped asking, in silence, why didn't she choose me? And instead of confronting the wound, he built a worldview that made it unnecessary. If women were irrational, if love was a trick, if desire was biological slavery, then his rejection didn't mean anything. But of course it did. It meant everything. And that's the thing about heartbreak. When it's unprocessed, it doesn't disappear. It just changes shape. It turns into bitterness, detachment, performance. It becomes the mask you wear when connection feels unsafe, and it becomes the armor you never take off, even when no one's shooting. But you don't have to carry that. You can name the grief for what it really is, not proof of your unworthiness, but a signal that part of you was still waiting to be completed. A signal that something inside you was still being outsourced to her gaze. Because the truth is, you weren't just hurt when she left. You were destabilized. You realized your foundation was thinner than you thought. And that's not a weakness. That's the moment your real life begins. The goal was never to be invulnerable. The goal is to become so integrated that love doesn't make or break you. To become the kind of man who doesn't use ideology to harden himself because he no longer needs to be defended from loss. That's what Schopenhauer never found. He died brilliant, but bitter, insightful but unhealed, respected but alone. Because no matter how strong your ideas, if they're built around a wound, they will always fail to give you peace. But you, if you're still watching, don't have to follow that path. You've felt the collapse. You've heard the silence. You've watched the eyes go cold. But what you build now, after all that, that's who you are. Not the man who was left. Not the man who tried. Not the man who cracked, the man who recentered, the man who stopped asking what she saw in him and started asking what he wanted to see in himself. You don't need to be louder. You don't need to be chosen. You need to be aligned. Because when you are, you'll find that love is no longer your lifeline. It's your reflection. And if it disappears again, so what? You're still here. And this time, you're not leaving with it.